Okay, I'm recording.
Welcome, I'm Dr. Brad Gobby of the School of Education at Curtin University. I'd like to welcome you to today's conversation with Associate Professor Kok-Sing Tang on Discourse Strategies for Scientific Literacy in a Post-Truth Era. Kok-Sing is an Associate Professor at the School of Education and the Discipline Lead of the STEM Education Research Group at Curtin University. He received a Bachelor of Arts and Master of Science in Physics from the University of Cambridge and an MA and PhD in Education from the University of Michigan. His research examines the role of language, discourse and representations in supporting scientific literacy. He's also a recipient of 2 Australian Research Council Discovery Grants on scientific drawing and VR learning. Kok-Sing has published in and reviewed for numerous top journals, including Science Education, Cognition and Instruction, and the Journal of Engineering Education. He is currently an editorial board member of Science Education. He is also a founding leader of the special interest group called Languages and Literacies in Science Education, established in 2017 within the European Science Education Research Association. His latest book is Discourse Strategies for Science Teaching and Learning, Research and Practice in the prestigious Teaching and Learning in Science series, a series edited by Norman G. Lederman. So thanks for your time, Kok-Sing.
Thanks for having me.
So for my first question, I've recently been exercising my mind around the flourishing of unfounded conspiracy theories and how science and scientific truths appear to be fighting a battle with what some may call ideology. So I wonder if you can speak to this and what you think the role is for scientific literacy.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brad, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for attending this session. Really happy to really talk about this work. It also came after this article that I wrote in the conversation, and I think that speaks to your question, Brad, about ideology and the importance of scientific literacy. So as you know, I recently wrote an article published in the Conversations talking about the fake news that we have about COVID and all these other situations, and also for why is it so important to have this idea of scientific literacy. So I think we all know that during the COVID period, we hear a lot of fake news and alternative treatments about how we can cure coronavirus by just drinking hot water or bleach to kill the virus. But even before the COVID came about, we already have this flat earth movement where so many more people are now believing that the earth is flat. And then we also have a number of people who are anti-vaccinations or denying that climate change is happening. So we do have a crisis in our hand. And the idea about scientific literacy is actually not a very new idea. It has been around actually for more than 50 years. But I guess at that time, scientific literacy is sort of cast as an aspiration, something that is good to have, but may not be the most essential things that we need in science education. But now, if you look at the world now, we are sort of living in a post-truth era where fake news and alternative facts are becoming so common and so easy to get for people. And also the public trust in science has gone down tremendously. So right now we're living in this era where scientific literacy, which I'm trying to argue is no longer an aspiration that is good to have, but it's now actually an essential thing that threatens our very survival in this post-truth era. So that was really the main gist of the article that I wrote in the Conversation about the importance of scientific literacy. And now for your question, Brad, I think I like your question a lot because your question really hits the nail on the core issue there. And the issue is about ideology and ideological conflict, and not just a simple conceptual or intellectual issue. I think we have sort of a tendency, to label all these conspiracy theories or flat earther as, simply idiots who doesn't understand science. But I really think that the issue is not a hate issue. It's not really about them not understanding the scientific concepts, but I think it's them not choosing to accept the scientific ideas. So it's really more of an emotional issue rather than a conceptual issue. And why is that so, I think? So if you think about it, actually, science itself is also an ideology. Why do I say that? You see, science is not just a body of factual and objective knowledge, but science is actually a way of thinking and a cultural way of doing things. So as a way of thinking, it is an ideology, right? Perhaps not in the way that we think about in terms of left-wing versus right-wing ideology that we often think about in politics. But science is an ideology because it sort of foregrounds a particular worldview in understanding the world from a particular perspective. And this perspective, we must not forget that it is actually originated from Western science with a sort of a particular history and a very masculine European middle class way of thinking that is not aligned with other sort of cultural ways of thinking. So therefore, in science, you find that we tend to prefer, for example, more general and universal ideas over sort of the more personal and localized solutions that other cultures may sort of foreground. And also science, or modern science, has a sort of a very specific criteria over what counts as knowledge or what counts as evidence, as opposed to what would be regarded as a belief or maybe even superstitions. So in all these ways, science is really an ideology. So now the real question becomes, if science is an ideology, the real challenge becomes, how do we manage this ideological conflicts? And if you think about this conflict, part of the reason is that science has a lot of strange ideas that we want students to accept. For example, the idea that you and I are made of trillions of moving atoms and molecules, or the idea that all life began as a single organism, or even some ideas like the Earth is round is actually a strange idea for actually many people to accept it as true. So that is the problem here, the ideological conflict. And I think another problem that we have is that in science education, we tend to teach these strange ideas as facts that students must accept, right? We don't really spend a lot of time teaching the history and the process of how do we know that these facts are true, or how do we come up with all these strange ideas. We don't teach students how scientists use evidence to support their ideas through this process that we call argumentation. So most of the time, we simply tell the students to accept these ideas. Number one, because the textbook says so. And number two, because they need these ideas in their test and in examination. So don't question these ideas, you just need them. So I think that's part of the problem in science education. We teach a lot of these ideas as facts rather as process. So now let me come to the role of scientific literacy. So in scientific literacy, there are actually two components to it in what researchers call a vision 1 versus a vision 2 of scientific literacy. So in vision 1, the focus is more on the knowledge and the skills. And this is an important part of scientific literacy that I would think that most of the curricula around the world tends to focus a lot more. Why? Because I think they are very important for our future generation of scientists, doctors, engineers, technicians, who will need that science knowledge in order for their job and for their career. And this is obviously also very important for society as well. But this emphasis tends to beg the question in the sense that not everyone becomes scientists or engineers or doctors. So what about the rest of the population? In fact, if you look at statistics, at most only 30% of our students will go on to further a STEM career or a diploma in the universities or in the polytechnic. Most of the people doesn't do science anymore after 10 years or so of compulsory science education. So the question becomes, what happened to this large group of people who don't use science when they become an adult? So this comes to the point of the vision 2 of scientific literacy. And vision 2 here is looking at the social role and the application of science into society. And this vision is that everyone, and not just the future engineers and scientists, but everyone needs to use science to make informed decisions related to science and technology issues. So decisions with regards to our personal health, decisions regards to a democratic process of voting for certain things, of managing climate change, managing pollution, and all these issues that science and technology has brought about. So this is a very important issue for everyone in a modern democracy. And the mission of science is, for Vision 2, is to actually promote this particular goal of scientific literacy. So now, how do we promote this Vision 2? And in the article, in my conversation, I mentioned a few things. So one of the things we need to do is we shouldn't maybe focus so much on scientific facts and knowledge. We still need the scientific facts and knowledge, but perhaps we can cut down a bit. And for every facts that we teach in the classroom, it is actually more important to talk about the evidence and how do we know what we know, so that the students can understand the process and then they can reason and think for themselves. How do we know all these ideas? And then the second thing is that we need to teach science as a discourse and as a way of thinking. And I will talk more about discourse later on, but these are the connections. We need to teach science as a discourse so that we can have an open conversation between the teachers and the students about what science is. So in this conversation, we need to convince the students why certain ideas are accepted as scientific knowledge, instead of sort of just forcing it down on them in an authoritative manner to learn it as facts. But we should actually learn it as a conversation, as in ideas that we develop, and to convince each other why some ideas are better than the other ideas. I'll stop here for a while. Yeah.
Well, let me take you up on that, the notion of discourse. So your latest book brings discourse, which is typically a focus on language in language education, and you bring it into the science classroom. So what do you mean by discourse, and why does discourse matter to science education and science educators?
Yeah, thanks. I think I will answer that question in two parts, because there are really two aspects of discourse. James Porgy, who is a very well-known researcher in education, makes this distinction between a capital D discourse, a large discourse, versus a small d discourse. So a big D discourse is actually a way of using language that's connected to a shared community of people, while a small d discourse is sort of an oral or written conversation or the communication between two or more people. So let's take an example. Right now, obviously, we are engaging in a small d discourse. You and I are talking to one another, and obviously there are other people here that are listening as well. But this conversation that we have with each other is not an ordinary conversation, in the sense that it's like a chit chat. If you and I, Brad, if we just go for lunch together or dinner together, the way we talk will not be the same as the way we are talking now. So you could say that right now we are actually engaging in what we would call an academic discourse, right? So this academic discourse, there's a certain characteristic ways of talking, and this will explain why you're always asking the question and why am I always answering the question, because we are engaging in this big D discourse. And also this discourse has a certain conventions in the sense that it will shape sort of how we might structure this conversation according to the way you plan it. But it also sort of creates certain expectations for me and also for you as an audience to hear certain things. So within this discourse, I'm expected to talk about sort of my research or about some new ideas in education. Instead of me just sort of rambling on about my own personal history, that will obviously be not following this particular discourse. So this example sort of tells you there are, within a discourse, there are not just talking that's happening, but there's also a larger structure, a larger social structure in terms of how we engage in our small d discourse. So there's always a big D discourse, and there's always the small d discourse that are happening. Now let's look at a science classroom. In a science classroom, obviously there are many of the small d discourses that are happening all the time everywhere. So you have teachers talking to the students, you have students talking to students, you also have students doing a lot of writing. So there are all these discourses, small d discourses that are happening. And this is not unique to science classroom, because every classroom does that, even in the language classroom. So in this sense, science is no different from any other classroom. And I would say that we need to also pay attention in science education about all these small d discourses that are happening, because it is also happening in the science classroom, so we should pay attention to it. So that's small d discourse. But how about the larger big D discourse? So in the science classroom, there are also these larger discourses that are operating behind the scene, but they are extremely important because they shape the way that the teacher and students will talk about or write about science. And they are not very visible on the surface. A teacher will never mention it outright, but if you really studied it carefully, you will see that behind the actual talk, there are these small little voices that are happening that will dictate to them how science should be talked about. So these are the larger discourse that are operating. And I find that there are two major big D discourses that are happening in the science classroom. One is what we might call a classroom discourse, and the other is what we all call scientific discourse. So let me unpack these two discourses a bit more. So classroom discourse, here we're talking about sort of the social structure that sort of influence the roles and the expectations between the teacher and the students. So who is the teacher and who is the student is not just because of who is the adult and who is the child, but it's also because of the way they perform within the classroom. So obviously a teacher is always the one asking questions and talking a few things, and students are sort of expected to sort of respond to those questions and so on. So this classroom discourse actually sort of shapes the way the interaction is happening in the science classroom as well as any other science classroom. Now, if you take an example, I myself have been to many classrooms around the world. So let's say besides Australia, I've been to a classroom in Singapore, in the United States, in the UK, and also in Sweden and Norway. One of the things I noticed, well, I guess many people will notice that in all the classrooms, right, at a very general level, they are more or less doing sort of the same thing, such that I can actually understand what is going on, and I can actually participate in those classrooms, even though I'm new to that cultural environment. And why is that so? Because, well, of course, there are many sort of cultural differences and individual differences across all classrooms. But if you talk about at a higher level, there is sort of a classroom culture that is repeatedly happening all over the world. And what is this culture? And this culture is, for example, we have a group of children and maybe one or two adults coming together in a shared space over a period of time. And in this period of time, they might do different things at different points, but you find that over the long run, there is always a certain pattern and rhythm that gets repeated over and over again. So this is the classroom discourse that is actually happening. And I say this classroom discourse is not unique to science, it's happening in every other disciplines as well. But the other one, which is scientific discourse, now this one is unique to the science classroom. So this scientific discourse, the big D discourse, is kind of related to what I talked about earlier with regards to ideology and with regards to the social cultural history of science. So scientific discourse is a unique way of thinking about the world and a cultural way of doing things with objects and with ideas. And within this scientific discourse, there are unique specific practices that are unique to the science disciplines. And here I'll just give two examples of what are these practices. These are scientific explanations and scientific argumentation. So scientific explanation is the use of theory or a model to account for a natural phenomenon that we can observe, or a phenomenon that has already happened and we know that it has happened. On the other hand, scientific argumentation is a practice that scientists use to convince their peers over the validity of a theory based on the use of empirical evidence. And this evidence it has to be empirical in the sense that you can collect data and it's always reproducible in different times and different places. So there are all these practices that influence scientific discourse and therefore also influence the way we would do things in the classroom. So therefore, if you think about what is happening in science, the idea of discourse is extremely crucial. I would even say that science as a discipline is developed from this scientific discourse, and in fact, we could say that without discourse, there is no science, right? So I think to answer the question, it is quite important for us to learn about this discourse so that we can use it to sort of promote the teaching and learning in the classroom.
So I'm thinking of the practicalities for teachers. So just getting you to explain a bit about the practicalities of discourse. If I'm a science teacher, how does my attention to discourse and my use of discourse strategies improve student learning?
Right, thanks. Yeah, I like this question because this question will brings out the idea of discourse strategies, which is really the key title of my book, which is called Discourse Strategies for Science Teaching and Learning. So I will come to this idea about what is discourse strategy. So discourse strategies are really just methods that we use in a conversation to direct the conversation towards a certain goal. And discourse strategies are something that we use all the time and in all kinds of situations. For example, it could be something as trivial as opening up the conversation. What are the discourse strategies to do that? So, for example, if you think about trying to pick up some girl or some guy in a bar, what is your opening line you would use, right? So this is an example of a discourse strategy. If you want to buy something from a shop or from somewhere, how do you get a good price, right? So this is also a discourse strategy in terms of bargaining. So discourse strategies are not actually new things. They are actually part of our everyday life. Now, if you look at the classroom, every teacher, and not just science teachers, every teachers use a lot of discourse strategies, even though they are not actually aware of them. Let me give you an example. So questioning is probably one of the best example of a discourse strategy. So teachers ask questions a lot of time, right? In fact, one of the studies shows that an average teacher asks about 100 questions in a single day. So why do teachers ask so many questions? And the reason is simply because questioning is a discourse strategy to achieve certain goals that the teachers wants to bring about. What are these goals? For example, a teacher may want to use questioning to manage student behavior. So, when the teacher say, "What are you doing over there?" Well, it's not really a question, but it is actually a direction for them to sit down, but in the form of a question. But teachers also use questioning to test students' understanding. And very often they will ask questions that are very simple and very factual. Like, for example, what is the unit of measurement for force or pressure? And there is only one answer to this question. So questioning is actually one of the most common form of discourse strategies that every teacher uses. And the same research that I talked about shows that 90% of the time when teachers ask questions, it is mostly for simple questions, like what I mentioned earlier, to test a simple recall question to test students' understanding, or behavioral questions to manage classroom behavior. And only a small minority of the time where teachers ask questions that really promote students to think in a certain way. So there's definitely scope for us to use questioning more strategically to promote students' learning and thinking rather than as simple recall or behavioral questions. So that's an example of a discourse strategy. In fact, I would say that discourse strategy, if you think about it, it is actually the most fundamental resource that all science teachers have. If you ask a science teacher, what is the most important resource that we have? The answer is not textbook, or an answer is not an internet. Answer is also not about any gadget or toys that we have in the lab. The answer is actually our discourse strategy, because that's the thing that all of us have, and we use it all the time to promote teaching. So therefore, in my book, I would say that discourse strategy is one of the most important things that we need to learn. Now, the issue here is that I mentioned earlier that even though discourse strategies, we use it all the time, but most of the time we are not conscious about how we are actually using, or we are even using discourse strategies. So I call this discourse strategy implicit, because they are sort of unconscious to us. And sometimes implicit strategies can be more harmful than good. So for example, if a teacher asks too many questions, and I'm sure we encounter many teachers who do that, then those questions can become quite meaningless. So one of the arguments in my book is that we need to make discourse strategies more explicit, in the sense that we need to be aware of it, so that we can then use these discourse strategies to help the students to learn. And here, let me sort of, and this is the point I will use my slide. So I mentioned that questioning is just one of many discourse strategies that are useful, but in my book, I actually talk a lot more about other strategies that we can use. So let me share my screen here.
So this is what you prepared earlier.
Yes, I did. So I thought, because I have a lot of information here, so it's easier to put it on a slide to show the kind of discourse strategies that I talk about in my book, but also not just the strategies, but the theory behind it. So I know there's a lot of information on this slide, and obviously I don't think I will spend all my time talking about every one of them, but I just want to provide sort of a glance of my book in terms of its conceptual and organizational framework. So in my book, apart from the introduction and the theoretical chapter, just chapter 1 and 2, and also the conclusion chapter, every chapter of my book focuses on one aspect of discourse. So for example, chapter 3 focuses on using discourse to establish classroom interaction. And for this discourse, right, this is where questioning becomes important, because questioning is not simply asking a question and getting an answer, but questioning is actually a part of interacting with the students. So you need to understand that interaction part in order for you to understand the role of questioning and how to use questioning to promote classroom interaction. So that's one of the focus of that chapter, which is only one chapter. Then in my book, I talk about other aspects of discourse. So chapter 4, for example, talk about using discourse to build scientific content knowledge. And this is particularly important for science, because in science we focus a lot about the content knowledge. And I think one of the misconceptions about many people is that when we talk about discourse, we only talk about the talk. We don't talk about the content. But actually, it's a misconception, really, because talking is, when you talk about something, there must be a content happening at the same time. So talk and content are never separated. So this chapter sort of focus about the content behind the talk. And again, for this particular aspects of discourse, there are some discourse strategies that I call critical semantic connection and unpacking extraction that we can use to sort of highlight the content behind the talk that is happening. And then chapter 5, I introduced the idea about scientific narrative. And this is quite an interesting idea that is kind of related to ideology. So when science teachers talk science, or when they use questioning, or when they give an explanation, they don't simply convey the content in terms of the ideas as well. But actually, if you study the kind of the meta, what I call the meta discourse, you can find that actually the teachers are conveying a certain narrative about what science is all about. And this has something to do with the ideology, whether science is really just authoritative facts, or whether science is something that is fun and inquiry, or whether science is something that is deeper than that, a more epistemic understanding of it. So all this is actually conveyed through this resource that we call meta discourse. And understanding this can help us to be more aware of the way we use meta discourse, and therefore the way we would promote a certain narrative about science. And then chapter 6 is where I talk about discourse as enacting scientific practices. So earlier I talked about the practices of explanation and argumentation. These are practices that are heavily mediated by language. So, how do we frame an explanation or an argument is through the use of language. So there are some discourse strategies that you can refer to if you're interested that help us to promote explanation and argumentations. And then the last two chapters is about the role of multiple representations. So when we talk about discourse, especially in science, it is not just talk and writing, but actually discourse is highly multimodal in the sense that we also use images, we use equations, we use graph, and these are extremely important for science because we can't run away from this representations. So when we use discourse, we never use them separately. We never just show a diagram and then we talk and then we show a graph, but we always use them in combination. And that is the key idea of multimodality, that all these things are connected. So I talk about multimodal integration of how discourse connects all these different pieces of representations together. And obviously there are some strategies that I highlight in my book that will promote these ideas. So yeah, so that's really sort of where I would say for the practicalities, Brad, as you mentioned, for science teachers. And if people have any questions here, I'll be happy to talk about some examples.
So I'm about to ask a final question, and you might have already given us enough. I'll let you choose whether or not to answer it. But before I do so, I'm just going to let everyone here know that if you have a question, Kok-Sing's happy to answer the question at the end. You can type a question in the chat box and we can ask Kok-Sing the question from there, or if you want to speak to him by microphone, do that. So we'll come to that very shortly. And so I was wondering if you would be able to give some practical examples from your book that might be useful for science teachers. Yeah,
sure. And I think I will look at who my audience are to decide what examples to give. And maybe I will use an example from chapter 3. I'm still showing this slide about, since I'm talking about questioning, maybe I will just follow up on that. So how does questioning sort of relates to the idea of discourse and the idea of discourse pattern, which I didn't talk about earlier. So let me just sort of further elaborate on these examples. So if we talk about questioning, research has found that most of the time when teachers ask questions, they actually follow this discourse patterns called an IRE, which stands for initiate, response, evaluate. So in initiate, a teacher will ask a question, and normally the question, as I said before, is a sort of a simple recall quite a type of question. So what is the unit for force? There's only one answer to that question, which is Newton. So that's the first move, which is called an initiate. Now, once the teacher asks the question, the next move is called the response, and this is where a student will give a response to their answer. And then there'll be a third move where the teacher will evaluate that response. So if you ask a simple questions and you only get one answer, one kind of answers, then obviously your third move, evaluate, will either be right or wrong, because they can only be right or wrong. So in the IRE, the teacher asks the questions, student response, and then the teacher evaluate that response. So questioning is actually tied to this thing called the interaction pattern. So the IRE interaction pattern is one of the most common pattern that we observe in most classrooms. And there's a lot of problem with this IRE pattern because they tend to promote very factual and simple kind of understanding. And I think this ties back to what I said earlier about scientific literacy and the idea that we mustn't teach science as facts. But the predominant use of IRE may actually help promote that approach. So we need to change the way we ask questions. And how do we change the way we ask questions? And is to look at our interaction pattern. So one example I can give is instead of an IRE pattern, some researchers have talked about making a slight tweak in the last move. So in the IRE, the E, the evaluate, instead of an evaluate, change it to a follow-up. A move, so that this IRE move pattern becomes an IRF pattern. So IRF stands for initiate, response, and follow-up. So the follow-up here means that instead of saying right or wrong, we want to follow up with the students in terms of their ideas, so as to help them to further their ideas rather than evaluate whether it's right or wrong. But to do that, you have to first change the question. Your initiate question mustn't be something that is too factual. You should ask a question that is more open-ended so that you can then get a range of responses that is not just right or wrong. So with these two changes, one is to change your initiate to open-ended question, And the second is to follow up the student's response rather than evaluate it in terms of right or wrong. So, and in terms of follow-up, there are a number of moves that researchers have sort of identified, and I wrote that in my book. So there are prompt, there are extend, there are constructive challenge, there are reflective toss. These are some of the names that we give to this move that a teacher may use to follow up with the student's response, so that it's not just right and wrong, but in a way that they can extend the talk beyond just an IRE. So what some researchers call an IRF, RF, RF, RF. So it always have a response follow-up kind of patterns. This is a simple example. It still doesn't change the way that it's still very authoritative from the teacher, but it is a very simple move that can change the way discourse is being made in the classroom. And just a simple change can have a lasting effect in terms of the kind of talk that you may find in the classroom. So this is just one little small examples, and I'll be happy to share more examples if anyone have any other sort of questions to ask. Should I keep this slide?
Penny's asked a question. She said, I'm very interested. Well, she's asked, she's very interested in teaching argumentation in a strategic way to build skill and confidence in a high school setting. Does your book discuss how to break down the teaching and learning of CER, claim evidence reasoning for middle years?
Yes, thanks Penny for the question. Yes, my answer is yes, and I just stopped the slide, but if you show my slide earlier, that was in chapter 6, I think. So chapter 6 is where I talk about a genre pattern. Now, what are genres? Genres are sort of the larger, broader patterns in terms of things, structure that frame the way we talk or frame the way we create knowledge. And in science, there are 4 major genres that we often use: explanations, information report, experimental report. So that's the kind of the lab report kind of things. And then the other one is argument. And sadly, most science teachers don't really focus on argument because it's not really prominent in the curriculum, but it's obviously something that is extremely crucial and that we need to do more to promote argumentation. So when I talk about the discourse strategies for promoting genre, I focus on two particular strategies. One is to promote scientific explanations, and this is actually a strategy that I developed from my research, and I call it the PRO meta language. It stands for premise, reasoning, outcome. And then for argumentation, many researchers have done this long ago, is that they developed this set of meta language called the claim, data, evidence, that will help students to understand, and not just understand, but also practice the use of argumentation. Now, the important part about this, why do I call it a meta language? Is because I call it meta language because you need to teach this language to the students and the teachers. So the students need to learn what is a claim, what is an evidence, and what is a warrant. And when they talk about ideas, you know, they should practice using this meta language to say that my claim is this, my evidence is this, so that whatever things that they say, you know, it's not just the facts, not just the idea, but it also tells us about what do they know about the facts. So if you say that my claim is that the leaves will turn brown, for example, right? That statement implies that your relationship to that idea. So it's not just the idea, but it's also our relationship towards the idea. So there has been a lot of research that use this meta language of claim, data, evidence to promote scientific argumentation. In that chapter, I have some examples from my research that talks about how, and they are real research, by the way, they are real research that teachers have done it before, and they actually use those meta language in the classroom. And part of my job was to observe and record all these conversations, and I transcribe them, and from there I analyze what is going on. And from there, I can use this example to help, hopefully, teachers like you to be able to use these strategies in your own classrooms. So I hope that answered your questions.
Lisa's asked a question. She says, "I'm just wondering if you have any insights into the discourse practices in the STEM classroom and teachers teaching out of field."
Excellent. Yes, excellent question, because this is going to be my next stage of my research, which you have anticipated. So actually, currently, I'm sort of trying to propose this research project for maybe future PhD students, and maybe if any one of you out here is interested to do a PhD with me, this could be a potential research project. So to answer that question, most of my research was done in the science classroom because my own background is a science education researcher, and I have a background in physics. But now, obviously, STEM is the sort of the buzzword now, and also my job and my role in CURTIN is to really promote STEM integration, STEM education. So the idea of STEM is not just science alone, but science in combination with mathematics, with technology, and with engineering. So really my next stage of research is to observe STEM classroom. And first of all, let me just say that there's no such thing as STEM classroom. We only have science and math classroom or technology classroom. But we do know that a lot of teachers right now are doing what we might call a STEM integration, be it in the science classroom or the math classroom. And the idea is to connect their own discipline with another discipline to understand how that interdisciplinary integration is happening. And this is a very interesting area of research that I'm very interested in doing, and I hope that more people are also doing, so that we can then sort of understand when we say we are doing STEM, what does it mean by we are doing STEM, and how does it translate into the discourse practices in the classroom? So what does a STEM classroom discourse practices look like? There's no answer to that question because there's no research, as far as I know, that have been done in this area. So this is really an exciting area of research that I know, Lisa, maybe you may want to do this research, and we can collaborate in this area. Yeah.
Is there anyone else who has a question? You want to turn on their microphones and ask Kok-Sing a question. As I said at the beginning, you might not have been here, but Kok-Sing will be more than happy to have a conversation with you or to answer any emails that you might have about his research, about research generally, about potential collaborations, and perhaps even if you're interested in doing doctoral or master's level research, he's more than happy to take your call and have a chat. No? All right. Well, this is today's recording is a part of a Meet the Expert series that we're doing in the School of Education. This is the third chat. We're going to have a few more, so I ask you to keep an eye out for further conversations between myself and a number of experts from within the school and also from outside of the school. Our next conversation will be with Associate Professor Richard Nishi from the University of New South Wales, who will be talking about educational leadership. So keep an eye out. I thank everyone for your attendance today, and I'd like to thank Kok-Sing for sharing his expertise and his time with us.
Thanks, Brad, for organizing this session.
Now, just before you go, I'm going to ask you to hand back the hosting rights back to me, and then I'll be able to close the session and download the recording. The recording will be uploaded to YouTube, so anyone watching today will be able to access it via YouTube. We'll promote the link to YouTube, so if wherever you receive the message about this, you should be able to receive the message of the YouTube link. Otherwise, you can join the School of Education at Curtin University Facebook page, and they'll be posting the link to the YouTube as well. How did you go? All right, so thanks everyone. We'll see you later. Am I the host now?
How do I return you the...
Go to my name on the right-hand side and click More.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for coming.
See ya. Thanks for that.
Who's speaking? Thanks, Jenny.
Okay, I've done it.
Great. Okay.
All right. Thanks. Bye again.
Thank you. I'll sort this out and I'll send you the link.
Yes. Some people has emailed me, so I will send those links to them as well. Yeah.
Okay.
This is a great session. Thanks for organizing it. I'm happy to see the outcome.
Thanks. See you later.
Bye. See you later. Thanks. Bye.